Welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. Here's your host, Tom Bourne.
Hi, and welcome to Health and Safety Conversations. I'm your host, Tom Bourne, and with me today is the absolutely marvellous Brett Reed. Brett, how are you?
I'm great, thank you, Tom. Looking forward to this conversation.
Fantastic. It's been a beautiful day in Perth, just looking out the window there for a second. Still crystal blue skies. Apparently we've had a bushfire down my way a little bit. I didn't know anything about it till I saw the smoke. But apparently there's a bushfire, which is, I would suggest, is unusual in March. Have you heard or seen anything similar around this time of the year?
Yeah, we actually about 2 or 3 days ago, so I live in the northeast of Perth, and further east of us again, we just had major fires up at Gidgegunnup Way down 2J Road, so heading towards Reed Highway and that area, if people know Perth. But yeah, major bushfires that were out of control for a day and a half. So yeah, we've had just the last week, we've had quite a bit.
I'm not looking forward to next summer. I think it could be a hell of a summer for fires. But who knows? Maybe we've burnt all the available fuel. All right, enough talking about bushfires. Brett, I've talked to you a few times at safety events, and that's how I've got to know you. I saw you at the AIHS symposium late last year as well, presenting. But for those who don't know you, can you tell us a little bit about your professional journey so far, where you've come from and what you're currently up to?
Yeah, thank you. I started my career after university. I joined the Army and went in to do officer training. Completed that, and I did 12 years all up in the Australian Army as an officer in regular Army units first, and then I went and did the SAS selection course and was successful with that, and so went into the SAS Regiment first as a captain, and was fortunate enough to be a troop commander. I was troop commander of an air operations troop, which is everything from working with helicopters, roping and mountain climbing, through to parachuting and high altitude, what's called HALO, high altitude, high opening parachuting, and HALO, high altitude, low opening parachuting. So jumping out at 25,000 feet, pre-breathing oxygen for an hour so you don't get the bends when they depressurize the plane. So a lot of high risk activities in that, and left the Army after 12 years full-time, and went into, I worked for 2 different multinational companies in operations and then business unit manager roles, and both service companies. So a lot of customer focused work, and then decided to have a go at working for myself. And that was more than 25 years ago. And so for the last 25 years, I've worked for myself and with clients around the world. I've worked in more than 20 countries around the world with clients, primarily in oil and gas projects. Some work with other resources companies, mining, but primarily oil and gas. So that's been my focus for the last 20 years, and increasingly, I've now changed my business model, where my focus is on coaching, and coaching with everything from frontline leaders right through to executive teams. And we coach in the area of leadership practices that create sustainable high performance.
Okay. In your opinion, do you think safety performance within organizations is most impacted by leadership practices and the leaders themselves?
Yeah, it's a great question, Tom. I'm in no doubt about that, and it's not just my opinion. I was really fortunate. Part of my journey was I joined the team at AIM and UWA. They had a joint venture back in 2002 a joint venture that was called the Senior Management Centre. So I came on board there. I was doing a lot of leadership work in the area of high performance teams at the time, and I headed up their faculty area for leadership practices that create high performance within teams. And through that, I met Dr. Keith Owen, he was working at RMIT, but he was based out of Texas, the University of Texas, and in their area of leadership and psychology. But RMIT was running a master's degree in change management based on his work, and he'd written a number of texts and his work in change management. So I met Dr. Keith Owen and got invited to join a research project that they were doing in the US with Chevron and a couple of other companies as well. But that research project looked at what are the leadership practices that create high performance within our teams. Mm-hmm. And it was a 3-year study. And what we found out of that was that 70%, at least 2/3, and typically 70% or more of the team performance was driven by leadership practices, not by the technical and the systemic things that the organization created. So to put it in simple terms, the average performing teams that were average, did exactly the same things and had exactly the same processes as the top quartile teams. Mm. The difference between the two was the quality of the leadership practices and what that did in terms of the alignment and engagement of the individual team members. Okay. So creating those relationships is fundamental to performance. And I saw that in my Special Forces career. As a leader in Special Forces, it wasn't the technology and the kit we were working with. It was the leadership practices and leaders stepping up, individual team members being totally responsible for themselves and their performance that created the outcomes, created that high performance.
Yeah. High performance in large organizations. When we talk about the leadership there and the influence they can have over frontline staff, are we talking about leadership from the very top, or are we talking more at the supervisor or immediate manager level?
Yeah, our research and research in general is pretty clear on that it's the frontline leaders that create the performance. They're the ones that drive the results for their customers. But if they're not empowered, if they're not given a situation, if the senior leaders don't do their jobs correctly and create the environment where those frontline supervisors and frontline leaders can perform, then no matter how much they are committed, no matter how good they are, they're always fighting a losing battle. So it has to be, it's driven from the top. The most senior leaders need to do the things that are expected of them or required, but then they need to continually build relationships and earn the trust of their frontline people, that their frontline leaders and team members will tell them whether things are truly working at the coalface or not. The things that they've set up, the systems they've put in place, the targets for performance and production, whether those things are achievable, and if the frontline workers understand and have clarity around how am I going to create the performance that you want. And I think Boeing is a classic example. Boeing is so much in the media at the moment, and there's so much information within the media and on YouTube. If you just have a look at the Google Boeing and the concerns there, unrealistic production targets, especially with the 737 MAX production, that their workers had just no way of, they were just concerned that they were not able to meet the production targets, but they were just being continually pushed to, well, that's your job, that's what you have to do. They're the targets we've set for you. So Leaders who think that they can do that by thumping the desk and making demands versus inspiring people to achieve. One of the fundamental leadership principle that I talk to my clients about is that there's fundamentally only two ways to motivate people. Mm-hmm. You can inspire them, or you can coerce and manipulate and threaten them. And so many senior leaders tend to opt for the latter. They don't understand how to truly inspire and motivate people. So they set targets and they offer them the carrot and the stick. They offer them the carrots, bonuses to achieve those things. But fundamentally, the guys at the front line say, I don't know how we're going to achieve this, but I'm gonna do whatever I need to do to get, I'll get that production bonus by manipulating the figures or doing whatever I need to make sure that I get the bonus, and stacked right throughout the organization. Everyone's focused on those bonuses, and one way or another, if you incentivize people heavily enough to get a target, one way or another they'll achieve that target. Right. I think we've all seen that with zero incident targets where things don't get reported, and therefore everyone gets their bonus, but everyone knows that there was things that happened that no one's going to talk about.
Yeah. Building trust with your workforce. How do you do it?
Yeah, one of the fundamental things that we talk with clients about is I often ask that question, that do you build trust or do you earn trust? And so many leaders approach it with the mindset that, well, I'm just going to set out to build trust with my workforce, and they fundamentally don't understand that trust is not something that they control. Trust is something that is given by the other person in the relationship. Do I trust you or don't I trust you? That's a question that I answer for myself. And so the other party in that relationship, whoever I'm interacting with, I'm looking at their behaviors and what are they doing to earn my trust. And if they think that they're in control of that situation and they're trying to manipulate things to build trust with me, they come across as not being authentic. And most people's radars go up. They perceive that. So we have a pretty simple formula that we use. That there's a few different versions of it. We've adopted it. We didn't create it, but there's a couple of different sources of it. One is a book called The Trusted Advisor, and it's a trust formula, which is basically 3 elements divided by a fourth. So the 3 elements are credibility. So to earn trust, you need to be credible, you need to be reliable. Reliability is, do you do what you say you're going to do? And when you tell me that I can speak up and I can be open and I can be honest, can I trust that? Are you reliable in that? And the third point is authenticity or intimacy. Are you authentic, and can we have conversations about how things really are? Or you get to a point where you go, I don't want to hear, this is all too much. And so not authentic, and no level of, a limit to how much intimacy is allowed or tolerable. So if you can get those 3 areas right, of being credible, being reliable, and being authentic, they're the foundations. But that all gets divided by self-orientation. And unfortunately, we see this with too many leaders, that they are not willing to put their team members first. They put themselves first. And that is just a destroyer of trust. the moment you realize that the guy you're working for, male or female, the guy you're working for will throw you under the bus the moment things get heated, or the moment they feel that they're going to be disadvantaged in some way, they'll throw you under the bus. Then trust goes out the window.
Yeah, yeah. It's hard to imagine maybe a bigger breach in trust when people do speak up. I don't know, even people who whistleblow, and there are negative consequences to it. Not necessarily talking about any company in the news lately. I was thinking even back to Dr. Patel days in with Queensland Health and what happened to the whistleblowers there. I also know there was a whistleblower who made some startling allegations about education in, I don't know, Halls Creek in WA, and something similar happened to them. Is there any worse thing than actually or breaching trust insofar as when people raise issues, something negative happens to them?
I don't think there is, Tom. I think we just know, don't we, that within our own circle of relationships, so we like to talk about, or what we've recognized is that leadership is a process, and leaders create relationships, and out of those relationships, they can increasingly raise the bar in terms of the level of achievement that people aspire to. And but those relationships, the foundation of those is trust. And if leaders are not able to earn that trust and to maintain that trust of their people, then performance never gets off the ground. It's at that basement level. And the difference between organizations that we've worked with and we will come in with a client where they're performing, they recognize they need to change something, but they're still performing at a reasonable level, an above average level. And if their leaders will be authentic and are able to earn that trust, performance just goes through the ceiling. It just, and that's simply because it's a bit like giving a horse its head. You earn that trust of the horse. And I grew up riding horses, and I've had quite a bit of, not recently, but quite a background in that. And when you earn the trust of a horse and you can give it its head, it's amazing what it'll do. And people are the same, teams are the same. You have to earn that trust, and then the performance just happens. And as a leader, you just have to inspire them. You don't have to drive them and direct them. And I saw that through, so one of the fortunate things I got to do was, in my time as Special Forces, I was involved in coming back as staff on the selection course. Mm-hmm. And then I left the Army in the early 90s, but then I got invited to go back, and I worked for a period of about 5 or 6 years as part of the Army Reserve component within the SAS Regiment. They have people who have skills that they want to retain. They have a cadre of people that come in when selection courses are on or work on different projects. So I did a range of that over 5 or 6 years. So I did a number of selection courses as staff, and got to see a lot of officers trying for selection for Special Forces. And the guys who didn't make it were the ones who thought that they had to come up with the answers themselves. Mm. And they had to be super performers who had to have all the answers, and everything was, they would drive things and control things, as opposed to the best performers are the ones who are able to get the team to come up with the results and team to come up with the answers, and they just facilitate that. And that's where we've gone with our coaching these days. It's how do you coach leaders to do that?
Yeah. All right. Now, just changing tack a little bit. You're the co-author of Safety Performance Reimagined, a 4D approach to organizational performance. Now, in that book, I've seen you've got this lovely diagram, which basically talks about the 6 factors. At the bottom of the lovely table, it's a fairly strong base based in trust. First of all, in a few minutes, can you just tell us a little bit about the 6 factors? But is everything else built above trust unachievable if you haven't built that solid base of trust first?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, isn't it? Because I fundamentally see it as the difference in there's 2 competing leadership styles, and you can align it with conventional safety, or traditional safety, and the new view of safety. I don't refer to it as a new view because it's something that myself and clients that I've worked with over the last 25 years have always done. It's leadership-driven safety performance, and that leadership is based in trust. And the 2 competing views in safety, the conventional approach is compliance-focused. And they just think that if they can come up with all the rules and controls, and then they're able to supervise people closely enough and have enough checks and measures of people's actions and behaviors, behavioral-based safety, then as long as people comply with the rules and the systems, then they'll create the level of safety performance, which they typically describe as zero, target of 0. And I'm not a fan of zero safety, 0 targets, because the world is I've learned from my time, the world's too chaotic to predict everything that could possibly happen. But they subscribe to 0 and they subscribe to a compliance-driven approach. What I've recognized through my time in high performance and especially special forces is the focus was never on compliance with the rules. The focus was commitment to a standard, commitment to building the capacities to do the things that were needed to be done to perform at the level that was needed. So it's a fundamentally different approach and a fundamentally different philosophy. That philosophy of compliance and control versus commitment to, there needs to be controls in there. There needs to be systems and processes put in place. But then it's a commitment to resilience and the adaptability to respond to what's happening in the environment that we're working with, such that people can maneuver as they need to continue to create that performance. Everyone's agreed on the performance standard that's required. What they don't know when they set out at any given day is what's going to happen in this day. What's the environment or the chaotic aspects of our environment? What's it going to throw at us that we need to adapt to today? And how do we do that within our team? And it's leadership and self-leadership at every individual team member level that creates that. And they're the things we focus on. And, when we do that with clients, performance just increases incredibly.
Yeah. For those who haven't had the pleasure of reading the book yet, can you tell us a little bit about the 6 factors?
Yeah, so as you said, Tom, it starts with trust. We very much recognize that if you can't create that level of trust, and a fundamental focus on that is leaders need to be able to earn trust, not build it. So building trust, leaders who do that think that they're controlling that. Where trust is earned, it's given by the individual's team members. Do I trust this person or not? And if they answer yes to that and make that call, then they will engage in the second factor, which is a level of dialogue and a level of openness and intimacy that is not usual in a lot of teams where they're highly structural and people don't know the limit, or they're uncertain in terms of how much can I share and it not be detrimental to me. And I think Boeing is a that's in the media now is a classic example. If you just Google the whistleblowers within Boeing and the difficulty that they have had, the people that have spoken up within Boeing, it's clearly not a safe environment for people to do that, and individuals suffer. So that's that second tier of if people feel that they can trust the organization and trust their leaders, then they'll have a level of dialogue that the outcome of that is shared meaning. When you get, so you create, leaders create that shared meaning, which leads to the third factor, that they can create a common purpose. We're all here for this, or we all have a common purpose. For the workers, it's, I want to do a job that I care about, that I enjoy, and I have job security. You know, I'm working for a company that's performing well, and we outperform our competition so that we know that our jobs are secure. And for the senior managers in the organization, it's, I'm continuing to build our brand and create shareholder value. If it's a listed company, we're attracting, we have a good share price, and we're attracting investors in the company, driving our share price at a higher and higher level. So that gives that overall organizational performance and security. So they're we call those the relationship-based that performance is built on, those three factors. When you create that, then you can start to set achievement oriented goals around what are we committing to. So you can set stretch targets, but people have in their mind, they understand how they might achieve that stretch target. It's not a guarantee, but they can see how it's possible. So you can inspire and influence people as a leader to go after that stretch target. You don't just hand it down from on high and, you know, hold the hammer over their head, the threat of not achieving that. You inspire them to go for that stretch target. That's the fourth factor, which is part of the achievement orientation. And when you get people committed to that, people readily will step up and say, I'll choose to be responsible for that. We're all committed to our role in the company and what we need to do. And I'll commit to being responsible for my role. And you can hold me accountable for that. That's the fifth factor, responsibility and accountability. And when you get those things working, the sixth factor is sustainable performance, and it just flows. So that's a simple process that we've worked with now for 20 years. And you know, we've worked in companies. We worked with an oil and gas company that my client acquired this company. It was a national oil company in Europe, had 65,000 employees. Mm-hmm. And in the year that they acquired it, they had 14 fatalities in that one national oil company. And our challenge that so our client engaged my company to work with them to change the culture within that national oil company. I've written about it in the book. It took 5 years to actually change that culture, but they went from having 14 fatalities, and in the 5 years before the merger, they had between 10 and 15 fatalities every year within that one company. And they just accepted. The way they described it is, hey, this is the oil and gas industry. It's a dangerous industry. People die. And we didn't talk about zero. We didn't focus on the outcome as such. We simply talked to people about their values and families and how bad they felt when colleagues lost their lives or people were seriously injured. But in the fifth year, they had their first year without a fatality in that company, and the culture has fundamentally changed, and it's still performing that way now. They've just gone from strength to strength. But that was simply working through those six factors and, you know, a sustainable cultural change. And we've done that. That's been my journey over the last 20 years. I just get to do that with companies now and love doing it because and increasingly we're working with companies. We're working with an aviation company at the moment there's an offshore helicopter company, and they're just performing at an incredible level, and so reliable, such great levels of engagement with their frontline crews. But what we talk to the senior leaders about there is the only people in that company that keep, that create the revenue basically are the pilots flying the aircraft and the engineers that are maintaining them and keeping them in the air. Everyone else is in service of those people. And the term servant leadership is thrown around. We don't tend to use that term, but it's that concept of the senior executive, the senior leadership team recognize that their job is to put everything in place. And this is in our book, we talk about the 4-dimensional performance. And the first 3 dimensions are all the systems and processes and the targets, the resources, the budgets, all the things that the executive in the company need to get right, such that people can perform. So they're objective things, and it's appropriate to talk about them as being binary and linear. They're right or wrong. You either have enough of resources, the budget is adequate, or it's not adequate to perform. And yeah, there's wriggle room in there, but it's pretty clear. Whereas when you start talking about the 4th dimension, leadership, people, and culture, we don't talk about right or wrong. We talk about are those things being done well or not being done well, because they're subjective and they're very different in how we measure them. We tend to measure them through our perception, and our perception influences how we feel about things and how motivated we are. So we work with the executive to say, are you in tune with how your frontline people, the engineers and the pilots flying the aircraft, are you in tune with how they feel about all the things that you've done to set up an environment where they can perform as the client needs them to? When you go to the field, do you stand up and do a town hall and speak at them and tell them all the latest news from the company? Or do you get out and just walk around and you're talking to the frontline guys saying, how's it working for you? This latest system we've implemented, was it rolled out adequately? Are you getting what you need through the system? Is it performing for you? Because systems should be designed to support people in their roles, support them doing what they're doing, not being there to control people. And I see this with government organizations so often. They put systems in place. And what do those systems do? They control what their workers are able to do.
Yeah.
They force them to comply with that system and in that process.
I talk to awful lot of frontline supervisors, literally week upon week, in my role at the moment. And I've maybe had a bit of experience with supervisors over the years. A lot of frontline supervisors that I've seen have either come from the floor or come from the crew, and they've been put in a leadership position for a few reasons. It might have been they were the gun operator. It might be that they're personable. It might be a number of different reasons. It might be because no one else wants the job. But overwhelmingly, most organizations I've seen have given very little consideration to coach or train the person coming into that role on how to, how to manage people. Is that what you find as well?
Yeah, how to manage and how to lead. What are the leadership practices that make a difference? Out of that research that I mentioned before that we did with, that I was able to do with Dr. Keith Owen and the team in the US, we started out by asking what are the leadership practices that drive performance. We used a statistical process, multiple regression analysis, to whittle down the leadership factors to a set of under 20. If you were just measuring performance, it was a set of 14 factors, but when we added safety performance in there, it was 20 factors that were highly correlated with the best performing teams. So this set of 20 leadership practices were common to the high performing teams. And we were able to separate those out to 6 of them were relationship-based factors, things like treats me fairly, makes sure that I understand my role and that I understand how I can do it. So my relationship to the job, my relationship to my peers, how I feel, that whole sense of psychological safety within the team, factors like that were six relationship factors, and then there was 14 achievement factors. So, but most organizations don't set people up well to perform with that within those. We found that when we trained leaders and coached them was an ideal way to do that. When you coach leaders, not simply putting everyone through a sheep dip where you train everyone for 5 days or whatever, because some of the leaders were naturally good at that. And the process we were using was upward feedback from the customers of that supervisor's leadership, i.e. their team members. We asked their team members, how well do they do these 20 things? And the guys that weren't doing it very well, we coached them, we developed them. Some of them couldn't make it. Some of them just couldn't get it because, you know, they were, well, there's a whole range of reasons, but in a lot of cases, it's just because they haven't had the background and the understanding. You know, they've grown up in an environment where being open and honest and being fair with people was not the norm, and they struggled to do that. And they struggled to confide in people, and they struggled to to be authentic. But for the people that could be authentic and lead at that level, once they understood what was required, it just moved forward in leaps and bounds. And team members in that environment, with the right culture, as you build that, team members are very forgiving when a boss is genuinely trying and doesn't quite get it right. You know, they will support them. So yeah, but so what we've actually done with that, and I'm just about to move forward or pull the trigger on this now. Rod Ritchie, who is co-author of my book and our book, and you know, he and I now we work together. We work with clients at that executive level and down, and but he and I have partnered with the Australian Institute of Professional Coaches and developed a coaching course on 4-dimensional performance. So the leadership practices that create performance, and both at the frontline level and at the executive level. So there's 2 different levels of courses. We're just rolling those out now, setting that up. But we believe that's the future of where we need to go. Instead of sheep dipping people through training programs that everyone gets the same level of training, we identify the people that are doing well and support them and encourage them to keep going. And the ones that need help, we coach and develop them in their skill sets so that they perform better. And I love that saying that a rising tide lifts all ships. And it's so true in terms of leadership practices in the organization. You get that increasing level of leadership practices, and it just creates a performance culture that is unbeatable.
Yeah, I can understand that completely. Having a core group of leaders that understand and get things, is it a concern that there might be a change in senior leadership at the top of an organization, and that everything you've built might be unbuilt?
Yeah, and your experience there, Tom, is showing through, isn't it? Because it's so true that you know, you do the hard work. You organizations, you know, and the people at the middle level and departmental level and frontline level in the organization will do that work, and they'll get that level of performance happening, and you get a change at the top. Someone comes in who doesn't understand it and can't even really see what is happening. They can't navigate in that space because they don't understand it. They come in and they'll make changes and undo it. As I said, I've been involved in quite a lot of leadership evaluation and selection, and some of the people are incredibly clever, and they're incredibly well trained. I like to. There's an expression that I use that they've got more degrees than a thermometer, but in the world of navigating organizational performance, they get lost in a revolving door and starve to death.
I think I know one of them.
They just don't get it. They've got MBAs, they've got doctorates, and they are so focused on the objective management, what we call the first three dimensions of performance. So they can set production targets and scheduling, and they come up with budgets and resources for it. Often they're incredibly tight and very difficult to work within, and systems and processes that don't work. And just last month, February, the FAA in Federal Aviation Authority in the US released an expert panel report on Boeing, which describes all the failures in each of those three areas. And it's a concern for me that I don't think we've seen the worst of the failures within Boeing yet. This has been going on for 5 odd years. It's so similar to what happened with BP through the period of 2005 to 2010 with Texas City and Macondo. Boeing has had numerous incidents, including the 2 737 crashes, and they're not learning, they're not changing. They're continuing to double down on their approach with everything, and it's a real concern. Unless they change, I think we're going to see more disasters come out of Boeing, which is such a shame because they're such a storied and amazing company in the past, as BP was. Interesting that BP, after 2010-11, Bob Dudley came in as CEO and he transformed that culture. And Boeing and BP has not had a major accident event where they had multiple before that. They had Texas City, Macondo, they had the spills in Alaska, they had the Thunder Horse rig that almost capsized and sunk. They luckily were able to save it. They had a series of major accident events and have turned that around. And that was through leadership. It wasn't through drastically changing the employees in the company. It was through senior leadership. And Boeing has got the same issue happening at the top now. And that's what the FAA has identified. But is Boeing listening? I think the jury's still out on that.
Yeah. I want to take you back. You talked about something that I certainly agree with, and maybe quite strongly agree with, about incentivizing safety goals, etc., and perhaps how they, counterproductive, to say the least. However, when we think about those incentivizing for safety goals, usually most people think about it for frontline supervisors or the workers down in the coalface, frontline, etc. Short-term CEOs, people at the very top of organizations who have only a few years in those positions and get paid bonuses based on share price, isn't that just the ultimate form of incentivizing, non-reporting?
Yeah, it's such a concern to me that when you see companies that do that, and again, Boeing is a classic example of that. You look at Colquhoun, who's the current CEO of Boeing, a salary of $1.4 million, but bonuses that are worth in excess of $20 million. And those bonuses are all focused, over the last few years have been focused on production and production that's driving the share price.
Yep.
So quality concerns, safety concerns, scheduling concerns, worker burnout, cultural problems as a result of that, where people just feel that they can't keep up with the level of work expected of them, long shifts, a lot of reworking because they've got problems, and managers, departmental managers that raise those concerns that are just ignored. So systemic problems within the company, but none of those things really carry any weight, because when you got $20 million riding on just in annual bonuses riding on production, if you remunerate people that way, what are they going to focus on?
Obviously.
Are they going to give up? Are they going to give up $20 million to make sure that to listen to the concerns of their workers and make sure that things are working well, but they're not achieving the unrealistic targets that have been set for them?
Yeah. It's interesting you talked about BP and Macondo and Texas City. If anyone has done any reading about it, you'll find the odd and interesting fact that on the day of significant incidents, the main incidents, different parts of the organisation at those sites were in fact celebrating their safety record, their success and safety record. And then on exactly the same day, they've had the major incidents which have resulted in fatalities. Again, you have to ask yourself, have we been incentivising, in fact, non-reporting and poor practice rather than, getting the basic building blocks of safety in place, building that trust and rapport so people can report, put their hand up and report things that aren't just right, and maybe getting them fixed before people perish.
Yeah, it's such a concern that organizations and academia as well. I've worked as I said, I worked with the Senior Management Centre, which is a joint venture between Australian Institute of Management and UWA, University of Western Australia. So I've worked in that area and seen a lot of what's offered through MBAs and PhDs in academia. They don't do a good job of setting up senior leaders to truly drive sustainable performance. They focus on these short-term incentives, bonus schemes, and they fundamentally focus on the wrong measures of performance. And it's no wonder that then companies struggle in that area. And so part of my history was in the time that I was in the 90s working with the SAS on projects. In June of 1996, we had a major accident event where two Black Hawk helicopters working on a counter-terrorist exercise up in Townsville in far north Queensland. Two Black Hawk helicopters collided on a nighttime training mission, and 18 soldiers died, 3 aviators and 15 SAS soldiers. And the captain, who's a troop commander, one of the troops, and it was just it was so sad that happened on a Monday, Tuesday on that night. But the Friday night before that, he was in Perth, Tim Stevens, and he was a captain in one squadron. 8 years earlier, I'd been troop commander of A Troop 1 Squadron, and he was troop commander of A Troop 1 Squadron. We were talking about how just the fun and the challenge of working in that environment where you're just doing super interesting things and working with super motivated people who they challenge themselves to rise to whatever level of performance is they think is possible. And 4 days later, he's dead. And along with 14 of the other special forces operators. And the shame about that was 10 weeks before that incident happened, it was reported on. It was there was an investigation into the systemic problems within the aviation regiment, because the SAS they were passengers on those helicopters, and the problems were to do with the aviation, the way they were mismanaging the aircraft, the Black Hawk maintenance and reliability, such that the pilots could not get the level of training that they needed. So that was investigated, reported on, and a recommendation sent to the Chief of the Army, and went up to the Chief of the Defence Force with a recommendation that level of activity not be done, not be undertaken, because the pilots and aircrew were not adequately trained to do that demanding level of flying night operation on night vision goggles with the special forces. And it was ignored.
Yeah. Yep.
And it cost 18 soldiers their lives, and numerous other people. There was 20 SAS guys on those 2 helicopters. The other 5 guys could not go back to their normal duties. One of them was in a wheelchair. The others were all so injured and broken that they could no longer perform the job they were doing. Some discharged, some stayed in, but went into different roles. But just so predictable. And Macondo was exactly the same. They'd been raising concerns for months within BP and Transocean, but there was 4 vice presidents out there on the rig that day, 2 from BP, 2 from Transocean. They weren't involved in talking to the frontline guys about their concerns. They were off pursuing their own little hobby horses. One was checking non-slip treads on stairs. That was a memo sent out that these have to be retrofitted to all stairs. And the other one was checking the compliance dates on lifting slings in lockers, the lifting gear lockers. Vice presidents going and doing their own little mini audits of compliance, as opposed to, hey guys, are you truly committed to are we giving you the right standards and targets, and giving you the resources you need, and are you committed to achieving those? Do you see how it's possible? Because they were telling them it wasn't.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to hear that, because there was no level of intimacy, and the leaders were not authentic. That third level of trust. So when you break these things down, it's not that hard to understand the systemic problems that cause these major accident events. But how many companies truly train on those areas? And what I can say is we've had a lot of success with our book. We've had a lot of people that are saying we're implementing the things you're talking about within the book, you and Rob, and ours is just one of many. There's many other books out there or a number of other really good books written by Clive Lloyd, Rosa Carrillo, Sidney Decker, Todd Conklin. If people just read those books and implement those concepts, then safety is not that sustainable safety performance is not that difficult to achieve. But it does require a shift from that compliance-focused, conventional safety to leadership-driven, committed approach to safety.
All right, Brett, we're getting close to time, so I'm just going to give you 3 quick questions. First one, every resource company I've had the pleasure of working with has this wonderful thing in their policies and procedures. It's called chain of command. Now, coming from a military background, you understand chain of command and its importance in life and death situations. Does chain of command have a place in everyday operations for regular businesses?
I believe it does, Tom, but it's subtle in that if you have a well-designed organization with job levels well mapped out, and again, come back to Boeing, one of the findings of the panel from last month with Boeing, the expert panel, was that people did not understand their they don't understand their role within the safety management system. That's one of the findings and a recommendation to address that. We see that it plays out all the time with organizations that are not performing. People don't understand their role, and therefore it's impossible to commit to something that you don't understand. So there's no level of commitment to people doing what's expected of them at that level, of their level. If you address those things, then I don't think of it so much as being a chain of command. It's simply a chain of responsibility. Everyone chooses to be responsible for their performance at their level in the organization. And that was a fundamental difference between the regular army, which is based on conventional. It's interesting that you can draw real parallels between regular army and conventional forces versus special forces and conventional safety, safety 1 and safety 2. That safety 1, conventional safety, is focused on avoiding things going wrong. So they put a lot of controls in place to ensure that things don't go wrong. And regular army and chain of command is very much in that, historically is focused in that area. And it's moved on a lot since my time in the army, and they're getting a lot better in that area. But that's typically where it's come from, and the focus. Versus special forces, it was always about rank didn't matter as much as your role, and at different times. So when I was a troop commander, we had guys that were snipers, explosive experts, photography, communications, medical, and depending on what you're doing, and then roping, rappelling, mountain climbing, depending on the task, you would be handing over to the expert within your team to come up with the plan and to design the approach. And it was a collective approach, but people would step up at different times and perform their specialist function. So it wasn't very hierarchical. It was about your skill set and your expertise within that team. And the best teams that I see perform that way. It's not a hierarchy.
Good. All right. Another quick one. You talked about the rising tide, right? Takes everyone with them.
Mm-hmm.
Does poor leadership practices flow downhill?
When we were doing that research on the leadership practices that drive high performance, it was really interesting that while we didn't specifically measure it and we weren't asking questions about the poor leadership practices. Anecdotally, it came out very clearly with the worst performing teams. When we interviewed members of the worst performing teams, when we used a balanced scorecard approach to rank all the teams, and the bottom quartile teams, the leadership practices that were common in those teams were extremely hierarchical. Leaders didn't communicate openly and honestly. They were very selective as to who they communicated information to. So information was seen as power with those worst performing leaders, and they would share some information, the correct information, with the people that they wanted it to go to, and they would selectively feed misinformation to other people. So actively working against creating a shared meaning and common purpose. So information was power. Retribution and retaliation, a lack of just culture, all of those things were rife. Lack of psychological safety. So yeah, absolutely. Poor leadership is at the very foundation of poor performance is what we saw. They had the same access to resources and the equipment and the systems and processes. It was leadership that was driving that poor performance.
Very good, very good. All right. One last question I have. Now, I'm not going to talk about any company in particular or any organization in particular, but just before we go and wind up, just want to very briefly revisit this bit about whistleblowers. Have you ever seen or read the book that's associated with the film that came out after it, The Firm by John Grisham?
No, I haven't read the book. So there was a movie made as well, wasn't there?
That's right. Tom Cruise was in it.
Yeah, Tom Cruise. So I've seen the movie, haven't read the book.
Okay. Let's just say there might be some interesting parallels that go on from what we've seen recently. All right. I'm going to leave you with that, Brett. I'm
motivated, Tom. I'll have to go and read the book because I remember the movie and it was powerful. So yeah, I'll go and read it. Thank you.
All right. Brett Reid, it's been an absolute pleasure speaking with you, as it is always, and I look forward to speaking to you again soon.
Thanks, Tom. Yeah, it's been a pleasure from my side, and I always enjoy sharing my story and some of the things we've learned and what we're doing, so I hope people get value out of it.
Thanks for listening to Health and Safety Conversations with Tom Bourne. Until next time, stay safe and enjoy the rest of your week.